The autumn wind carried the scent of dying roses through Hartfield Manor's gardens, and Maren Whitmore pretended not to notice how perfectly it matched her mood. 6 months. 6 months since she had walked away from the altar in front of 300 of England's finest. 6 months since she had shattered the most anticipated wedding of the season and vanished from London like smoke through a cracked window. 6 months since she had last seen Corwin Ashcroft's face, the face that still haunted her dreams with its expression of confusion, hurt, and something far worse. Betrayal. "Miss Whitmore! Miss Whitmore! Watch!" She blinked back to the present as young Phoebe Hartfield performed an ungainly cartwheel across the lawn, her governess instincts overriding her dark thoughts. "Careful, darling. Mind your petticoats." "Petticoats are dreadfully boring," announced Thomas, Phoebe's brother of 7 years, from his perch in the apple tree. "I'm glad I don't have them." "You have other constraints," Maren said, moving beneath the tree with practiced calm. "Climb down now, please. Your mother will have my position if she sees you up there." "Mother won't see. She's too busy preparing for the guests." Guests. The word sent a familiar chill through Maren's chest. Lady Hartfield had been preparing for this house party for weeks, though the guest list remained mysteriously vague. "A few old family friends," she'd said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing that concerns your duties, Miss Whitmore." But something about her employer's knowing glances had unsettled Maren. Something about the extra staff being hired, the finest wines retrieved from the cellar, the careful attention to which rooms were being prepared. "The carriages are coming!" Phoebe shrieked, abandoning her gymnastics to sprint toward the gravel drive. "I can hear them!" Maren's heart lurched. "Phoebe, wait! We shouldn't—" But the girl was already gone, and Thomas had scrambled down from his tree to follow his sister. Maren had no choice but to pursue, her plain gray dress catching on a rose bush as she hurried around the corner of the east wing. She emerged onto the front lawn just as the first carriage rolled to a stop. It was black, lacquered with silver trim, drawn by 4 matched horses the color of midnight. The family crest on the door gleamed in the weak autumn sunlight. Maren's feet stopped moving before her mind registered why. She knew that crest. She had nearly worn it on her wedding ring. The carriage door opened, and a polished boot descended onto the gravel, then a leg in perfectly tailored trousers, then shoulders that could carry the weight of a dukedom without bowing, then his face. Corwin Ashcroft, Duke of Ravenscourt, stepped into the afternoon light, and the world around Maren dissolved into white noise. He looked different. Harder, somehow, the aristocratic planes of his face sharpened by months she hadn't witnessed. His dark hair was longer, curling slightly at his collar, in a way she remembered running her fingers through. His jaw was set in that familiar line of control. But his eyes found her immediately, as if he'd known exactly where to look. Gray. She'd forgotten how gray they were, like winter storms, like London fog, like the dove-colored silk of the dress she'd been wearing when he'd first told her he loved her, the dress she'd been wearing when she'd discovered the truth. Time stretched between them like taffy, elastic and endless. Phoebe was tugging at Corwin's sleeve, introducing herself with childish abandon. Thomas was peppering him with questions about his horses. Lady Hartfield had appeared on the front steps, all gracious smiles and effusive welcome. But Corwin didn't look at any of them. He looked only at her. "Miss Whitmore." His voice carried across the distance between them, deeper than she remembered, rougher. Her name in his mouth sounded like an accusation and a prayer tangled together. "So this is where you've been hiding." Hiding. The word landed like a slap. She should curtsy. She should lower her eyes like the servant she now was. She should murmur something appropriate about welcoming his grace to Hartfield Manor and retreat to the nursery where she belonged. Instead, she lifted her chin. "I haven't been hiding, Your Grace. I've been living." Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Pain? Anger? She couldn't tell anymore. She'd thought she could read him once, had believed she knew every shift of his expression, every unspoken word behind his careful mask. She'd been wrong about so many things. "Corwin!" "There you are." A feminine voice floated from the second carriage, a voice Maren recognized with sickening certainty. "Come help me down. This road has quite destroyed my nerves." Lady Araminta Vance descended in a cloud of lavender silk and calculated grace, her honey-blonde hair perfectly arranged beneath a fashionable bonnet. She draped herself on Corwin's arm with practiced possession, her cat-green eyes sweeping the assembled company until they landed on Maren, and she smiled. "Why, Miss Whitmore," Araminta purred, "how delightfully unexpected. I didn't realize Lady Hartfield employed runaway brides as governesses." She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking crystal. "Then again, I suppose you must do something now that you've ruined yourself so thoroughly." The words were designed to wound, and they did. Maren felt the impact in her chest, sharp and precise. But before she could respond, before she could retreat with what remained of her dignity, Corwin spoke. "Enough, Araminta." 2 words. Quiet. Final. Araminta's smile faltered. Lady Hartfield's eyebrows rose, and Corwin released himself from his companion's grip with deliberate care, his gaze never leaving Maren's face. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice held something new, something she couldn't identify. "We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Your Grace. Then you can listen." He took a step toward her. "Because I've spent 6 months searching for you, and I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." Maren's heart hammered against her ribs. The truth. He wanted the truth. But if she told him the truth, everything would shatter. Again. 1 year earlier, the Marchioness of Kellaway's spring ball was everything Maren despised about London society. Glittering, gossiping, and utterly indifferent to anyone without a title or a fortune. She wouldn't have been here at all if not for her brother. Phineas had sworn this would be the last time. Just one more favor, one more social event, where she needed to smile prettily and distract attention, while he conducted his business in the card room. One more evening of pretending she belonged among the silks and diamonds, when her best dress was 3 seasons old, and her pearls were paste. "You worry too much, Maren." Phineas had grinned his charming, reckless grin. "Just dance with a few lords, laugh at their jokes, and we'll be home by midnight. Easy." Nothing about this was easy. She stood near the wall, half hidden behind an arrangement of hothouse flowers, watching the glittering crowd swirl past. Debutantes in white giggled behind fans. Matrons in jewels whispered behind hands. Lords assessed and calculated, deciding which heiress might be worth the inconvenience of marriage. And somewhere in this chaos, Phineas was gambling away money they didn't have, with men who wouldn't accept excuses when he lost. "You look like you're planning an escape." The voice came from her left, deep, cultured, tinged with dry amusement. Maren turned to find a man standing beside her, tall and broad-shouldered, in impeccably tailored evening clothes. His dark hair was swept back from a face that would have made sculptors weep with envy. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that seemed designed for both commands and secrets. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as slate, watching her with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Am I that obvious?" she asked, before propriety could stop her. His lips curved slightly. "Only to someone equally desperate to leave." "You? Desperate?" She couldn't help the skeptical note in her voice. Everything about him screamed wealth and power. Men like him didn't understand desperation. Even dukes can be bored to tears by society's endless machinations. He inclined his head slightly. "Corwin Ashcroft, Ravenscourt. A duke? She was trading quips with a duke. Maren felt the color rise in her cheeks, but she refused to simper like the debutantes she'd been silently mocking. Maren Whitmore. Nothing particularly impressive. Whitmore? He seemed to consider this. Your brother is in the card room, losing spectacularly to Lord Prescott. Her stomach dropped. How do you know that? I was there briefly. He's not subtle about his tells. A pause. Prescott is not a forgiving creditor. Fear coiled in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. My brother's affairs are his own concern. And yet, you're here, playing wallflower, while he digs his grave deeper. Those gray eyes saw too much. You're not here to find a husband, Miss Whitmore. You're here as a distraction, a pretty face to keep attention away from his schemes. No one had ever seen through her so quickly. It was terrifying. It was almost refreshing. If you'll excuse me, wait! He caught her arm, gently but firmly enough to stop her retreat. I have a proposition. I'm not interested in propositions from strange men at balls. This one might save your brother's neck. He released her arm but held her gaze, and mine, in a different way. Against her better judgment, she listened. The story came out in fragments. A grandmother determined to see him wed before the season's end. A parade of suitable candidates thrust at him at every event. A particular lady, Araminta Vance, whose family had somehow convinced the Dowager Duchess that a match was all but settled. I don't want to marry her, Corwin said flatly. I don't want to marry anyone, not yet. But my grandmother won't relent until she sees me genuinely interested in someone else. Someone unexpected. Someone who would make Araminta withdraw without requiring an actual engagement. You want a decoy, Maren said slowly. I want a partner. His eyes met hers with unnerving directness. Someone intelligent enough to play the role convincingly. Someone society doesn't know well enough to immediately dismiss. Someone who has reasons to cooperate that have nothing to do with trapping me into marriage. Someone like me. Someone exactly like you. The ballroom continued around them, oblivious to the negotiation happening in its margins. Maren's mind raced through the implications, the risk, the opportunity. My brother's debts, she said quietly. You would clear them? Entirely. And when this arrangement ends, references, connections, whatever you need to secure an independent future, you'll walk away with more than you came in with. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was everything her mother had warned her about. Men with power offering deals too good to be true. But it was also the only lifeline anyone had thrown her in years. How long would this charade continue? Through the season. 3 months, perhaps 4. Long enough for my grandmother to accept that Araminta isn't happening. Then we part amicably, claiming a mutual decision. 3 months of pretending to be courted by a duke. 3 months of walking through a world she'd only glimpsed through windows. 3 months that could secure Phineas's safety and her own future. And if feelings become complicated. Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to read. They won't. I'm not looking for love, Miss Whitmore. I'm looking for a strategic solution. If you can't maintain that boundary, this won't work. She should have been insulted. Instead, she felt oddly relieved. Clear terms, no pretenses of romance, just 2 people solving problems for each other. I have conditions, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. Do you? My family learns nothing of the true arrangement. As far as they know, I've caught the genuine interest of a duke. It protects their dignity. Agreed. Second, I will not be paraded like a prize mare. If I'm to play this role, I play it with my pride intact. I would expect nothing less. And third, she held his gaze, willing her voice not to waver. "When this ends, we end it together. Publicly, with no scandal attached to my name. I won't be painted as the desperate girl who reached above her station." Corwin Ashcroft studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling sense of being truly seen. Not her plain dress or paste pearls, but something deeper. "Miss Whitmore," he said finally, extending his hand, "I believe we have an accord." She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. She just didn't know yet that changing everything meant changing herself, and that some bargains come with costs no one can anticipate. Ravenscourt Manor rose from the Kentish countryside like something from a fever dream. 3 days after the ball, Maren stood in a hired carriage that had been sent for her, far finer than any conveyance she'd ever occupied, staring at the sprawling estate through the rain-spattered window. The house itself was a symphony of pale stone and climbing ivy, with windows that caught the weak morning light and threw it back in golden shards. Gardens stretched in every direction, meticulously maintained even in the gray drizzle. A lake glittered in the distance. This was where she would live for the next 3 months. This was where she would pretend to belong. The carriage rolled to a stop, and a footman appeared instantly with an umbrella, offering his hand to help her down. Maren reminded herself to breathe. She was here as a guest of the family, introduced through mutual acquaintances. That was the story. That was the lie. "Miss Whitmore?" A young woman burst through the manor's front doors, ignoring the rain entirely as she rushed down the steps. She was perhaps 19, with Corwin's dark hair, but warmer eyes, brown where his were gray, sparking with an enthusiasm that seemed almost aggressive. "You're here. Finally. I've been dying to meet you." "Lady Tanith?" Maren guessed, remembering Corwin's brief description of his younger sister. "Just Tanith, please." "Lady makes me feel like I should be doing embroidery and discussing the weather." She grabbed Maren's arm with startling familiarity. "Come inside before you catch your death. We have so much to discuss." The entrance hall was even more overwhelming than the exterior had promised. Marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, watching Maren with what felt like ancestral disapproval. A grand staircase swept upward in curves that seemed designed to make arrivals feel insignificant. "Don't let it intimidate you," Tanith said, following her gaze. "The house is ridiculous, I know. Our great-grandfather had more money than sense. Corwin keeps threatening to sell half the paintings, but grandmother would have apoplexy." "Speaking of your grandmother, she won't be down until noon. Grandmother believes mornings are for commoners," Tanith grinned. "Which gives us hours to get you settled and strategize." Before Maren could ask what exactly required strategizing, a door opened somewhere above them, and footsteps echoed on the marble. Corwin descended the stairs with the easy grace of someone who'd grown up treating grandeur as ordinary. He wore riding clothes, boots splashed with mud, a coat that hugged his shoulders in ways Maren tried not to notice. His dark hair was windswept, his cheeks flushed with cold. He looked less like a duke and more like a man, and something in Maren's chest shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Whitmore." He stopped at the base of the stairs, inclining his head. "You made good time. Your carriage was efficient, Your Grace. Sebastian is an excellent driver." A pause, something unspoken passing between them. "I trust the journey wasn't too taxing?" "I've survived worse." The corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't doubt it." Tanith looked between them with barely concealed delight. "Already sparring. This is going to be wonderful." "Maren. May I call you Maren? Let me show you to your rooms. The blue suite has the best view of the lake, and I've had fresh flowers brought in specially." She was swept up the grand staircase before she could protest, Tanith chattering about dinner arrangements, and which gowns they'd need to commission, and something about a musical next week that would be deadly dull, but excellent for being seen together. The Blue Suite was not a room. It was an apartment, a sitting room, a bedroom, a dressing room, a private bathing chamber with running water that seemed like witchcraft. The view from the windows stretched across emerald lawns to the Silver Lake, and beyond that, rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. "It's too much," Marin said quietly. "It's exactly right." Tanith squeezed her hand. "You're supposed to be my brother's potential duchess. You need to look the part." The word duchess landed like a stone in Marin's stomach. "I'm not actually going to be—" "I know." Tanith's voice softened. Corwin explained the arrangement. "But for this to work, no one else can know. You have to believe it, at least a little. You have to act like you belong here." "I'm not sure I know how." "Then we'll teach you." A fierce determination entered Tanith's brown eyes. "I've watched society girls my whole life, Marin. I know what they do, how they move, how they speak. Most of it is performance anyway. You just need to learn the script." Before Marin could respond, a bell chimed somewhere deep in the house. Tanith's expression flickered. "Grandmother's awake. Early." She exchanged a glance with Marin that suggested this was not good news. "She'll want to see you immediately, to assess the situation." "Assess?" "Grandmother assesses everything. People, paintings, the precise temperature of her tea." Tanith smoothed her skirts. "Don't worry, just be yourself." "Tanith, myself is a merchant's daughter, with no fortune and paste pearls. That's exactly what your grandmother will disapprove of. Then be the version of yourself that walked into that ballroom alone, traded barbs with a duke, and negotiated terms like a diplomat." Tanith smiled. "That woman doesn't need pearls to be impressive." She left to inform the Dowager Duchess that their guest was ready. Alone in the Blue Suite, Marin moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Somewhere below, she could see Corwin crossing the lawn toward the stables, his stride long and purposeful. This was temporary, she reminded herself. A performance. 3 months of playing a role, and then she would return to her real life with Phineas's debts cleared and her future secured. Simple. Except nothing about Corwin Ashcroft felt simple. Nothing about the way he'd looked at her in the entrance hall, or the way his hand had felt sealing their bargain, or the way she kept catching herself wondering what lay behind those unreadable gray eyes. She was in dangerous territory, and she had a terrible feeling she was only beginning to understand how deep the danger ran. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscourt received visitors in the morning room, a space that seemed designed specifically to make guests feel inadequate. Pale blue walls rose to gilded ceilings. Porcelain figurines watched from every surface with painted disapproval. The furniture was delicate and expensive, the kind that made you afraid to sit. And at the center of it all, positioned like a queen on her throne, sat Honoria Ashcroft. She was smaller than Marin had expected. Decades of life had shrunk her frame, but sharpened her features into something hawk-like and assessing. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken her maid an hour. Her black mourning dress, still worn for her son, dead these 3 years, made her pale eyes seem almost colorless. Those eyes fixed on Marin now with the intensity of someone who had spent 70 years learning exactly how to take a person apart. "So," the Dowager's voice was surprisingly strong, "you're the girl who has captured my grandson's attention." Marin curtsied, grateful that her mother had drilled proper form into her since childhood. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me. I haven't decided yet whether I'm receiving you or dismissing you." "Sit." Marin sat. The chair was as uncomfortable as it looked. Silence stretched between them. The Dowager made no move to fill it, simply watching with those colorless eyes. It was a test, Marin realized. A test to see if she would babble nervously, reveal her inadequacies, crumble under scrutiny. She refused to crumble. "You're not what I expected," the Dowager said finally. "What did you expect, Your Grace?" "A fortune hunter, a schemer, some pretty face with empty eyes and practiced smiles." She tilted her head, bird-like. "Instead, I find a merchant's daughter in a 3-season-old dress who sits in my morning room like she has every right to be here. Should I not? That depends entirely on your intentions." The Dowager leaned forward. "My grandson is the last of this line. His father died without seeing him properly settled. His mother died bringing his sister into the world. Everything falls to Corwin now. The estates, the title, the continuation of a family that has endured for 600 years. I understand the weight of his position. Do you?" The word cracked like a whip. "You understand nothing. You're a girl playing dress-up in a world that will chew you apart the moment it senses weakness. Society is not kind to outsiders, Miss Whitmore. It's especially unkind to outsiders who reach above their station." The words stung, but Marin kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate your concern for my well-being, Your Grace. I'm not concerned for your well-being. I'm concerned for my grandson's reputation." The Dowager rose, moving to the window with surprising grace for her age. "Lady Araminta Vance comes from an excellent family. Her bloodlines are impeccable. Her fortune is substantial. She would make an ideal Duchess of Ravenscourt." "Then why hasn't your grandson married her?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Slowly the Dowager turned. Something had shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a flicker of something that might have been respect. "Because my grandson, for all his virtues, is stubborn beyond reason." She returned to her chair, settling into it with deliberate care. "He was engaged once, you know. 3 years ago. A suitable match by any measure. The girl died of fever 2 weeks before the wedding." Marin's breath caught. Corwin hadn't mentioned this. He blamed himself, though there was nothing he could have done. Since then, he's resisted every attempt to arrange another match. He says he's not ready. He says he needs time. The Dowager's lips thinned. "But time is a luxury this family cannot afford. He's 32. He needs heirs. He needs a wife. With respect, Your Grace, perhaps he needs to choose for himself. And you think he's choosing you?" A harsh laugh. "A girl with nothing to offer but a pretty face and quick tongue?" "I think," Marin said carefully, "that your grandson is intelligent enough to know his own mind. And I think that perhaps, you might trust him to make decisions about his own future." The Dowager stared at her for a long, terrible moment. Then she laughed again. Different this time, less harsh, almost surprised. "Spine," she said. "You have spine. I'll grant you that." "Thank you, Your Grace." It wasn't entirely a compliment, but something in her posture had relaxed, almost imperceptibly. "Very well, Miss Whitmore. You may stay. For now. You may attend the events of the season as my granddaughter's companion and my grandson's guest." "Thank you. I'm not finished." The Dowager's eyes hardened again. "I will be watching you. Every word, every gesture, every glance. If I discover that you're manipulating my grandson, if I find any evidence that you're here for money or position or some scheme I haven't yet identified, I will end you. Not socially, Miss Whitmore. I will end your family. Your brother's debts will be called in. Your father's remaining business connections will dry up. Your mother will die in shame." The threat was delivered with the casual certainty of someone who could absolutely make it happen. "Do we understand each other?" Marin's mouth was dry, but she forced herself to meet the Dowager's gaze. "Perfectly, Your Grace." "Good." The Dowager picked up a small silver bell and rang at once. "Now leave me. I have letters to write, and you're giving me a headache." The door opened instantly. Tanith must have been listening, and Maren escaped into the hallway with her pulse racing beneath her skin. "You survived!" Tanith seized her arm. "What did she say? How bad was it?" "She threatened to destroy my entire family if I hurt your brother." Tanith's face fell. "Oh, that bad. She also said I have spine." "Did she?" Tanith's expression shifted to something like wonder. "She's never said that to anyone I've introduced her to. Usually she just glares until they cry." "That's reassuring." "It's actually excellent news." Tanith squeezed her arm. "It means she sees you as a threat. And grandmother only bothers threatening people she thinks might actually win." Maren wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. But as they walked through the manor's gleaming halls, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't see. A line that led somewhere far more dangerous than she'd anticipated. Behind her, in the morning room, the Dowager Duchess sat alone with her thoughts. "Spine indeed," she murmured to the empty room. "We'll see how long it lasts." The first week at Ravenscourt passed in a blur of lessons and fittings. Tanith had taken Maren's transformation as a personal mission. There were sessions with the dancing master, a severe French émigré who rapped her ankles with a cane when she missed a step. There were hours with the dressmaker, standing still while bolts of silk and velvet were draped across her frame. There were endless tutorials on which fork to use, which titles to employ, which subjects were acceptable for conversation, and which would mark her as hopelessly common. "You're doing wonderfully," Tanith insisted after one particularly grueling afternoon. "By the Marchioness's ball next week, you'll be indistinguishable from any lady of quality." Maren wasn't so sure. Every time she thought she'd mastered a rule, 3 more emerged to trip her up. Society, she was learning, was a labyrinth designed by sadists. Through it all, Corwin remained distant. He appeared at meals, exchanged polite conversation, and vanished into his study or the stables. He was unfailingly courteous and absolutely unreachable. Until the night she found him in the library. It was nearly midnight. Maren had given up on sleep, her head too full of etiquette rules and dance steps, and had wandered downstairs hoping to find something to read. The library had seemed a logical destination. She hadn't expected to find Corwin there, slouched in a leather chair by the dying fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and shadows in his eyes. "Miss Whitmore." He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Can't sleep." Too many thoughts. She hesitated in the doorway. "I can leave." "Stay." He gestured to the chair across from his. "Unless you're afraid of being caught alone with me. We're supposed to be courting. Being alone together hardly seems scandalous." His lips curved slightly. "True enough." She settled into the chair, tucking her feet beneath her. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, rain pattered against the windows like whispered secrets. "Your grandmother told me about your engagement," she said quietly. "The one that ended." "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Corwin's hand tightened on his glass. "Grandmother talks too much." "She was warning me, I think, about the weight of your position." "The weight." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Yes, that's one word for it." Silence fell between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt almost companionable. 2 people sharing darkness without needing to fill it with words. "Her name was Genevieve," Corwin said finally. "Lord Ashbury's daughter. We'd known each other since childhood. The engagement seemed natural. Expected." He drained his whiskey. "I thought I loved her. Maybe I did. But looking back, I wonder if I loved her, or simply loved the idea of her, the simplicity of choosing someone everyone approved of. What was she like? Gentle. Quiet. The opposite of me in almost every way." His eyes found hers. She would have made an excellent duchess. Compliant, gracious, utterly predictable. You say that like it's a flaw. Perhaps it is. He set down his empty glass. I've been surrounded by predictable people my entire life, Miss Whitmore. People who say what's expected, feel what's expected, want what's expected. Genevieve fit perfectly into that world. And that bothered you? It terrified me. The admission seemed to surprise even him, because I realized, standing at her grave, that I hadn't really known her at all. 3 years of courtship, a lifetime of acquaintance, and she was a stranger. Marin didn't know what to say. This was more honest than she'd expected, more vulnerable. The controlled Duke she'd met at the ball seemed like a mask, and beneath it was someone far more complicated. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "I don't know." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Perhaps because you're the first person who hasn't looked at me with pity or expectation. You don't want anything from me except the terms of our agreement. Is that so unusual? More than you know." The fire had burned down to embers. In the dim light, Corwin's features seemed softer, more approachable. Marin found herself studying the lines of his face, the sharp jaw, the aristocratic nose, the mouth that seemed designed for both severity and tenderness. She looked away quickly. "My father lost everything 3 years ago," she said. "Bad investments with a partner who turned out to be a fraud. We went from a house in Mayfair to a cramped flat in Cheapside. My mother cried for a week. My father stopped speaking entirely." "And your brother?" Phineas blamed himself, even though he was barely 20. He thought if he'd been smarter, noticed the signs, he could have prevented it. She shrugged. "So he started scheming, chasing quick money, believing that one lucky break would restore what we'd lost. And you? What did you believe?" "That luck was a lie rich people told themselves to avoid admitting their advantages." She met his eyes. That survival required calculation, not hope. Corwin studied her for a long moment. Recognition flickered across his face, or perhaps understanding. "You're not what I expected either." "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure anymore." He rose, moving to the window. The rain had intensified, drumming against the glass. "My grandmother thinks you're a schemer. Tanith thinks you're wonderful. The servants are taking bets on how long you'll last." "And you?" He turned, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I think you might be the most honest person I've ever met, Miss Whitmore, and that terrifies me more than anything else." Before she could respond, before she could even process the weight of his words, he crossed to a bookshelf and pulled down a slim volume. "Here." He held it out. "Keats. You mentioned at the ball that you appreciated poetry. You remembered that?" "I remember everything you said." His eyes held hers. "Sleep well, Miss Whitmore." He left her alone in the library with the dying fire and a book of poetry, and the unsettling realization that her heart was beating far too fast for this to be purely professional. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a transaction. Nothing more, but as she opened the book and read the inscription, "To Corwin, may you find beauty in darkness. Your loving mother." She understood that nothing about this had ever been simple, and she was beginning to fear it never would be. The Marchioness of Whitbury's ball was the first true test of their charade. Marin stood before the mirror in her borrowed finery, a gown of deep rose silk that Madame Laurent had fitted to her frame with almost magical precision, and barely recognized herself. Her dark hair had been swept into an elaborate arrangement. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and ears. Her cheeks held color from the rouge pot Tanith had insisted upon. She looked like someone who belonged at a ball. She hoped the performance would match the costume. "You're stunning," Tanith declared from the doorway. "Corwin is going to swallow his tongue. Corwin is going to maintain appropriate distance and engage in measured conversation, as agreed. That's not what his eyes are going to say. Tanith grinned. Trust me, I know my brother. The carriage ride to the ball was tense. Corwin sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral, but Maren caught him glancing at her more than once. The dowager occupied the seat beside him, radiating disapproval like heat from a forge. Remember, the dowager said as they neared the Whitberry townhouse, you are a guest of this family. You will be polite. You will be gracious. You will not embarrass us. Yes, Your Grace. And you will not, under any circumstances, outshine Lady Araminta. Maren's jaw tightened. I'll do my best to be appropriately invisible. The dowager's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, the carriage rolled to a stop. The Whitberry ball was a crush of silk and jewels, a kaleidoscope of candlelight and whispered scandal. Maren's entrance on Corwin's arm drew immediate attention. Heads turning, fans fluttering, conversations halting mid-word. They're staring, she murmured. Let them. Corwin's hand pressed slightly against the small of her back. You're meant to be seen, remember. The first hour was a blur of introductions. Names and titles swirled together until Maren couldn't distinguish earls from viscounts. She smiled until her face ached, curtsied until her legs burned, made polite conversation until she wanted to scream. But she didn't falter. Not once. The Whitmore girl is holding up remarkably well, she overheard one matron comment. Though of course her breeding is questionable. Questionable? It's non-existent. Her father was in trade. Still, there's something about her, a certain quality. Quality won't protect her when Araminta gets involved. The word sent ice down Maren's spine. She found out why an hour later. Lady Araminta Vance swept into the ballroom like a conquering queen, her golden hair gleaming beneath a tiara that probably cost more than Maren's entire family had ever possessed. She wore virginal white, a calculated choice that made her look innocent and bridal and absolutely certain of her future. Her cat-green eyes found Maren immediately. Miss Whitmore. Araminta's voice carried just far enough to draw an audience. How delightful to see you here. I didn't realize the Marchioness extended invitations so broadly. Lady Araminta. Maren kept her voice steady. What a lovely gown. White suits you. It's the color of purity, of course. Araminta's smile sharpened. Though I suppose not everyone can carry it off. Some complexions simply aren't suited. The insult was clear. Several nearby ladies tittered. You're quite right, Maren said pleasantly. White can be terribly unforgiving. It shows every flaw, every imperfection. She let her gaze sweep over Araminta's gown with deliberate attention. Fortunately, you have nothing to hide. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Araminta's smile froze. For a moment, genuine fury flickered in those green eyes. Then she laughed. A brittle, tinkling sound. Clever. I see why Corwin finds you amusing. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Enjoy it while it lasts, Miss Whitmore. Amusements fade. But I will still be here when you're long forgotten. She swept away in a cloud of white silk and expensive perfume. Maren realized her hands were shaking. That was magnificent. Tanith appeared at her elbow, practically vibrating with delight. Did you see her face? She's never been handled like that. Never. I may have made an enemy. You already had an enemy. Now you have one who respects you. Tanith squeezed her arm. Come. The dancing is starting, and Corwin needs to claim you before every lord in London beats him to it. The first waltz was theirs, as planned. But when Corwin took her hand, something felt different. His grip was warmer, his gaze more intent. I heard what you said to Araminta, he murmured as they began to move. Was it too much? It was perfect. His eyes held hers. You didn't crumble? Should I have? Most people do. Araminta is skilled at finding weaknesses. His hand tightened at her waist. But you don't seem to have any. Everyone has weaknesses, Your Grace. Then you hide yours exceptionally well. They turned across the floor, and Marin became acutely aware of how close they were. His breath on her hair, his hand burning through the silk at her back, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. This was dangerous. This was feeling far too real. People are watching, she whispered. Good. Let them watch. His gray eyes never left hers. Let them see exactly what I see. And what do you see? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Corwin didn't answer immediately. The music swelled around them, couples whirling past in blurs of color. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. I see someone extraordinary pretending to be ordinary. Someone brave pretending to be cautious. Someone who deserves far more than a business arrangement with a duke who doesn't know how to feel anymore. The waltz ended. They stood frozen for a moment longer than propriety allowed, his hand still holding her heart still racing. Then he stepped back, bowing formally. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore. Thank you, Your Grace. He walked away to satisfy his social obligations, and Marin was left standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of people, feeling more alone and more confused than she'd ever felt in her life. Across the room, Araminta watched with narrowed eyes, and in the shadows near the doorway, a figure Marin didn't recognize observed everything with quiet, calculating attention, then slipped away to deliver a message that would change everything. The weeks that followed the Whitberry Ball blurred together like watercolors in rain. There were more events, musicals and garden parties, afternoon teas and evening soirees. At each one, Marin played her role with increasing confidence. She danced with Corwin. She sparred with Araminta. She endured the dowager's watchful gaze and Tanith's enthusiastic coaching. And somewhere along the way, the performance stopped feeling like a performance. She caught herself looking forward to Corwin's appearance at breakfast. She found excuses to linger in the library when she knew he'd be there. She memorized the rare moments when his careful mask slipped and something real showed through. A genuine laugh, a flash of vulnerability, the way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous, but knowing and stopping were entirely different things. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Rain had trapped them indoors, canceling the afternoon's planned garden party. Tanith had retreated to her rooms with a headache. The dowager was occupied with correspondence, and Corwin had found Marin in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids and the drumming of rain against glass. Hiding? He asked, settling onto the bench beside her. Breathing. She gestured at the plants surrounding them. It's quieter here, easier to think. What are you thinking about? You. The word nearly escaped before she caught it. Home, she said instead. My mother's garden. Nothing like this, of course. Just a small patch behind our flat, where she grows herbs and a few flowers. But she tends it like it's the most precious thing in the world. You miss them, your family. Every day. She traced a pattern on the glass, watching the rain distort the world beyond. I write to them, but it's not the same. I can't explain what this is, what we're doing. My mother would worry. My father would disapprove. And Phineas. Your brother would see an opportunity? My brother would see exactly what this is. A transaction. She met his eyes. He'd probably admire the strategy. Corwin was quiet for a moment. His voice dropped to a murmur. Is that still what this is to you? A transaction? The question hung between them like mist. Marin knew what she should say. Yes. Of course. Nothing has changed. The lie sat on her tongue, ready to be deployed. but she was so tired of lying. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I thought I understood the rules. Keep distance, maintain boundaries, walk away when it's over with my dignity intact." She laughed, a hollow sound. "But then you give me books of poetry. You ask about my mother's garden. You look at me like—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how close he was sitting, how intently he was watching her. "Like what?" "Like I'm not just a means to an end." That careful mask cracked, just slightly, just enough. "You're not," he said. "You were never supposed to be. But then you walked into that ballroom with your sharp tongue and your defiant eyes, and you looked at me like I was just a man. Not a title, not a responsibility, not a prize to be won or a burden to be managed. Just a man. You are just a man. No one else seems to think so." His hand found hers, a touch so gentle she almost thought she'd imagined it. "My entire life, I've been the heir, the responsibility, the future of this family. Every relationship, every connection, every person I've ever known has wanted something from the title. Never from me." "What about Genevieve?" Pain flickered across his face. Genevieve wanted what she'd been raised to want, a suitable match, a comfortable life. She never saw past the surface because she never looked. His fingers tightened around hers. "You look. You see things I've spent years hiding. It's terrifying." "Then why keep me around?" "Because being terrified is better than being numb." His eyes held hers with devastating intensity. "Because you make me feel things I'd convinced myself I'd never feel again. Because every time I'm near you, I have to remind myself this isn't real. And I'm starting to forget why that matters." Marin's heart was beating so fast, she could barely breathe. This was the moment, the threshold. If she stepped back now, maintained the boundaries they'd established, she could still walk away intact when the season ended. But if she stepped forward, Corwin. His name felt different in her mouth, more intimate without the title. "What are we doing?" "I don't know." His free hand rose to cup her face, gentle, questioning. "But I know I don't want to stop." The rain continued its symphony against the glass. The orchid swayed in some invisible draft, and Marin realized, with a clarity that felt like falling, that she was already past the point of no return. She'd just been too afraid to admit it. "I don't want to stop either," she whispered. His smile, genuine, unguarded, and transformative, was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Then we won't." He leaned closer. She could feel his breath on her lips, could see the storm gray of his eyes darkening with something that looked like hope. "Your Grace," a servant's voice shattered the moment. "Urgent message from London. Lord Ashbury requests your immediate presence." Corwin pulled back, frustration and duty warring on his face. "Tell him I'll leave within the hour." The servant bowed and departed. "Lord Ashbury?" Marin asked, trying to calm her racing pulse. "Genevieve's father." Corwin's expression had shuddered again. "He's been unwell. If he's summoning me—" He didn't finish the sentence. "I may be gone several days. Go. Family obligations don't wait." He stood, then paused, looking down at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "When I return, we need to finish this conversation." "Yes, we do." He left without another word, but the warmth of his hand lingered on hers for hours afterward, and in the shadows of the conservatory doorway, a figure had watched the entire exchange. A figure who would carry this information to someone very interested in destroying whatever was growing between the Duke of Ravenscourt and the merchant's daughter who had captured his heart. Corwin was gone for 5 days. 5 days of Tanith's worried glances, 5 days of the Dowager's suspicious questions. 5 days of Araminta appearing at every social event with pointed comments about the Duke's absence and meaningful looks at Marin. "He's probably come to his senses," Araminta purred at Lady Thornton's tea. "Distance has a way of clarifying one's priorities." Marin smiled politely and said nothing, but privately, she wondered if Araminta was right. The intimacy of the conservatory felt distant now, dreamlike. Had she imagined the warmth in his voice, the promise in his eyes? Perhaps separation had reminded him of what was practical, what was expected. Perhaps he'd return and announce that their arrangement was concluded, thank her for her service, send her back to Cheapside with her references and her connections and her broken heart. Because it would be broken. She'd finally admitted that to herself. Somewhere between the library conversations and the ballroom dances, between the poetry books and the garden walks, she'd fallen in love with Corwin Ashcroft. Not the Duke. Not the title. The man who hid his grief behind duty and his loneliness behind control. It was the worst possible outcome of their arrangement, and she had no one to blame but herself. On the 6th day, he returned. Marin was in the music room, practicing a sonata that Tanith had insisted she learn when she heard the carriage in the drive. Her hand stumbled on the keys. She forced herself to continue playing, to not rush to the window like a lovesick fool. Minutes passed. The household stirred with his arrival. Footsteps echoed in distant hallways. Then the music room door opened. Corwin stood in the doorway, still wearing his traveling clothes, dust on his boots, and exhaustion in his eyes. He looked like he'd ridden through the night. He looked like he'd been thinking of nothing but this moment. "You're playing off-key," he said. Marin's hand stopped. "You're supposed to be resting from your journey." "I couldn't wait." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just before the piano bench. "I spent 5 days thinking about what I wanted to say when I returned. I had speeches prepared, arguments, logical explanations for why we should stop pretending this is still an arrangement. And the moment I saw you, I forgot all of it." His voice was rough. "Except one thing." "What thing?" He pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle but insistent on her arms. "Lord Ashbury is dying. I sat with him for hours, listening to him talk about Genevieve, about the life they'd planned for her, about all the things that would never happen now." His jaw tightened, and I realized something. "What?" "That I've been dying too. Slowly. Ever since we buried her. I've been performing life instead of living it, going through the motions of duty and responsibility because I didn't know what else to do." His eyes searched hers. "And then you appeared. You challenged me. You saw through me. You made me want things I'd sworn I'd never want again. Corwin, I love you." The words came out like a confession dragged from somewhere deep. "I love your sharp tongue and your defiant eyes, and the way you refuse to let anyone intimidate you. I love that you argue with my grandmother and befriend my sister, and look at this ridiculous house like it's a puzzle to be solved rather than a prize to be won. I love you, Marin Whitmore, and I don't care any more if that complicates our arrangement." She stared at him, heart pounding, mind reeling. "You can't," she whispered. "I'm nobody, a merchant's daughter with nothing to offer." "You're everything." His hands rose to cup her face. "You're the first real thing I've felt in 3 years. The first person who's made me believe that life could be more than duty and grief and endless hollow performance." Tears burned in her eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. "I know. I was supposed to leave at the end of the season, disappear, let you marry someone suitable. I don't want someone suitable." His thumbs brushed away the tears that had escaped. "I want someone extraordinary. I want you. Your grandmother. Can't adjust her expectations. Society. We'll survive the scandal. Araminta has no claim on me and never did. His forehead pressed against hers. Stop giving me reasons to be sensible. I've been sensible my entire life, and it's brought me nothing but emptiness. I want to be reckless for once. I want to choose with my heart instead of my head. Maren closed her eyes. Every rational part of her screamed that this was madness. She was reaching above her station. She would be resented, judged, possibly destroyed by the world he inhabited. But when had rational thought ever brought her happiness? "I love you too," she said. The words had barely left her mouth before he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't cautious. It was 3 years of frozen grief shattering against weeks of careful restraint. His mouth claimed hers with a desperation that stole her breath, and she gave back everything she had. All the longing she'd been denying, all the want she'd been suppressing. They broke apart, gasping, foreheads pressed together, hearts racing in tandem. "Marry me," Corwin breathed. "What?" "Marry me. Tomorrow. Next week. As soon as I can arrange it." His eyes blazed with certainty. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want an arrangement that ends. I want forever." Forever. The words shimmered between them like a promise. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes." His smile was sunrise after endless night. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. And Maren let herself believe that perhaps fairy tales could happen to girls like her after all. She should have known better, because even as they stood wrapped in each other's arms, planning a future that seemed impossibly bright, forces were already moving against them. Araminta's spy had delivered his report. The Dowager was receiving visitors in secret. And somewhere in London, a forged letter was being prepared. A letter that would shatter everything they'd built and send Maren fleeing from the altar in shame and horror. But that was tomorrow's catastrophe. Tonight, they had love, and for a few perfect hours, that was enough. The wedding was set for 3 weeks hence, 3 weeks of preparations that consumed Ravenscourt like a fever. Dress fittings and flower selections, guest lists and menu consultations, the endless details of joining 2 lives together in the eyes of God and society. The Dowager had not given her blessing. "You're making a mistake," she'd said flatly when Corwin announced the engagement. "A mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life." Perhaps. But it will be my mistake to make. Since then, she'd participated in the preparations with cold efficiency, doing her duty while making her displeasure clear in every glance, every clipped word, and every pointed silence. Tanith, by contrast, was incandescent with joy. She threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that bordered on mania, insisting on the finest of everything, chattering endlessly about the life Maren and Corwin would build together. "You'll be my real sister now," she said one evening, clasping Maren's hands. "I've always wanted a sister." Maren smiled and tried to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in her chest, because despite the joy, despite the love, something felt wrong. Small things at first. Servants who fell silent when she entered rooms. Letters addressed to Corwin that he read with darkening expressions before burning them. The Dowager's mysterious visitors, who arrived late and left early, never announced, never explained. And Araminta. Lady Araminta Vance had taken the engagement announcement with surprising grace. Too much grace. She'd attended events where Maren was present and offered nothing but polite congratulations and serene smiles. It was deeply unsettling. Deeply. "She's planning something," Maren told Corwin the night before the wedding. "I can feel it. Araminta is always planning something. It's her nature." He kissed her forehead. "But she's lost. She knows it. Whatever schemes she's concocting can't hurt us now." But he was wrong. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and overcast. An ill omen, the servants whispered when they thought Maren couldn't hear. She ignored them, focusing instead on the dress that Tanith helped her into, the flowers woven through her hair, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. In 2 hours, she would be a duchess. In 2 hours, her entire life would change. She was nearly ready when the letter arrived. A servant brought it on a silver tray, apologizing profusely for the interruption. "It was marked urgent, miss. From your brother." Phineas. Her heart stuttered. Had something happened? Was someone ill? She tore open the seal with trembling fingers. The words inside shattered her world. "Dearest sister, I hope this reaches you in time. I've discovered something terrible. Something you must know before you make the worst mistake of your life. Your precious Duke has played us both for fools. The arrangement was never what he claimed. He didn't clear my debts out of kindness or strategy. He bought them. He owns them now. Every gambling loss, every promissory note. He's been using them as leverage all along, ensuring you'd have no choice but to cooperate with his scheme. There's more. I've obtained letters, correspondence between Ashcroft and Lord Prescott, from months before you ever met. They were planning this, planning you. The chance encounter at the ball, the arrangement, the courtship that seemed so perfect, all of it orchestrated to secure a bride he could control, a bride with no power, no connections, no ability to refuse him. He doesn't love you, Maren. He never did. You're just the most convenient solution to his problems. A wife who will be grateful enough to never question him, obedient enough to never defy him, isolated enough to never escape him. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't trust a man who sees people as chess pieces to be moved. Run, sister, while you still can. Your loving brother, Phineas." The letter slipped from Maren's numb fingers. No, it couldn't be true. Corwin wasn't capable of such calculated cruelty. The man who'd given her poetry, who'd opened his heart in the library, who'd kissed her like she was the answer to prayers he'd forgotten how to speak. But the details, the specifics, how could Phineas have known about Lord Prescott if it wasn't true? How could he have invented a conspiracy so perfectly aligned with her own buried fears? She thought of the dowager's cold disapproval, the servants' whispered conversations, the letters Corwin burned without explanation. She thought of Araminta's serene smile, and suddenly everything she'd believed came crashing down. "Miss," Tanith appeared in the doorway, radiant in her bridesmaid's gown. "It's time. The carriage is ready." Maren couldn't speak, couldn't move. The letter lay on the floor between them like a bomb. Tanith's expression shifted from excitement to concern. "What's wrong? You've gone pale as death." "I can't." The words scraped from her throat. "I can't do this." "What?" "Maren, what are you talking about?" But Maren was already moving, grabbing her cloak, pushing past Tanith toward the servants' staircase. She couldn't face the front entrance, couldn't risk encountering Corwin before she escaped. "Maren, stop!" Tanith chased after her. "Whatever's happened, we can fix it. Just tell me." "There's nothing to fix." Maren's voice broke. "It was all a lie. He was using me. Everything. The arrangement, the courtship, the proposal. All of it was manipulation. That's not possible. Corwin loves you. Corwin loves what I represent. A solution. A convenient wife who won't make demands or cause problems." She reached the ground floor, the servants' entrance just ahead. "I won't be anyone's chess piece, not anymore." "At least let me explain to him." "No." Maren turned, and the devastation in her face stopped Tanith cold. "If you ever cared about me at all, you'll let me go. You'll tell him I couldn't go through with it. Tell him I changed my mind. Tell him whatever you need to, but don't come after me. He'll be destroyed. He'll recover. The words tasted like ash. Men like him always do. She fled into the gray morning, leaving behind the wedding dress, the flowers, the future she'd almost believed was real. At the church, 300 guests waited. Flowers perfumed the air. Musicians stood ready. And Corwin Ashcroft stood at the altar, watching the door with a smile that slowly, painfully faded as the minutes passed and his bride failed to appear. The whisper started first, then the murmurs, then the full-throated scandal. The Duke of Ravenscourt had been jilted at the altar. By the time anyone thought to search for Maren, she had already vanished into London's crowded streets, determined to disappear forever. She didn't know that Phineas's letter was a forgery. She didn't know that Araminta had orchestrated every word. And she didn't know that the man she'd left standing at the altar would spend the next 6 months tearing the world apart to find her. 6 months later. Present day. "We need to talk." Corwin's words hung in the air of Hartfield Manor's entrance hall, heavy with 6 months of searching, 6 months of questions, 6 months of a wound that refused to heal. Maren stood frozen by the servants' staircase, acutely aware of every eye upon them. Lady Hartfield's shocked expression, the children's confused faces, Araminta's calculating smile. "I have nothing to say to you, Your Grace." "Then you can listen." He took a step toward her. "I've earned that much, at least. You've earned nothing from me." "Haven't I?" His voice hardened. "I searched for 6 months, Maren. 6 months of hired investigators, and dead ends, and nights spent wondering what I'd done so wrong that you couldn't even face me before running. You know what you did. I know what you think I did. Another step. But I also know that whatever poison convinced you to leave wasn't the truth." Poison. The word made her flinch. The letter from Phineas was a forgery. Corwin's gray eyes blazed. "Every word of it. I tracked your brother down 3 months ago. He never wrote to you that morning. He never discovered any conspiracy. He was in debtor's prison when someone claiming to be his solicitor brought him papers to sign. Papers he didn't read carefully because he was desperate for any way out." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "That's impossible. Is it? Or is it exactly what someone with resources and motivation might arrange?" She thought of Araminta's serene smile. The pieces she'd refused to examine began shifting into terrible new patterns. "The letter detailed specific things," she whispered. "Your arrangement with Lord Prescott, the timing of our meeting, details no one could have invented. Details that anyone with access to my private correspondence could have discovered." Corwin's jaw tightened. "My grandmother's servants were bribed. My study was searched while I attended pre-wedding celebrations. Every piece of information in that letter was real, but twisted, recontextualized, weaponized against us. Why should I believe you? Because I'm here." He spread his hands. "Because I spent 6 months searching for a woman who destroyed me publicly, who left me standing at an altar in front of everyone I've ever known, who vanished without a word of explanation. If I were the calculating monster that letter described, why would I still be trying?" The question pierced through her defenses. She'd spent 6 months as a governess, burying her grief in work, convincing herself that escape had been the right choice. She'd built walls so thick she'd almost believed them permanent. But seeing him here, hearing the raw pain in his voice, watching his careful control crack around the edges, she felt those walls trembling. "Your Grace," Lady Hartfield's voice intruded. "Perhaps this conversation would be better conducted in private." "Yes." Corwin didn't look away from Maren. "The library. Now." It wasn't a request. The library at Hartfield Manor was smaller than Ravenscourt's, but the smell of books brought memories flooding back, late-night conversations, Shared poetry. The first time she'd seen past his mask. Corwin closed the door and leaned against it, as if afraid she might bolt again. 6 months, he said quietly. I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times. All the things I wanted to say. All the questions I needed answered. He laughed hollowly. And now I can barely form words. Corwin, I loved you. The admission cut through the air. I still love you, against all reason and self-preservation. You shattered me, Marin. You took everything I'd finally allowed myself to hope for and destroyed it, without even giving me the chance to defend myself. I thought I was protecting myself. From me? Anguish twisted his features. I would have died for you. I would have burned my entire world down if you'd asked. And you thought I was manipulating you. The letter was convincing. More convincing than everything we'd shared. He pushed off the door, crossing toward her. More convincing than the night in the conservatory? The kiss in the music room? The way you looked at me when you said yes? Tears burned in her eyes. I was scared. Everything about our relationship started as an arrangement. How was I supposed to know what was real and what was performance? You were supposed to ask. His voice broke. You were supposed to trust me enough to ask. The truth of his words landed like a blow. She'd spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that when disappointment seemed to arrive, she'd fled rather than fighting. She'd believed the worst because believing the worst felt safer than risking hope. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate. She knew they were inadequate. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back the 6 months I spent in hell. But his expression softened. Sorry doesn't undo the scandal, or the whispers, or my grandmother's endless "I told you so" lectures. I know. But it's a start. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with aching gentleness. If you mean it, if you're willing to fight this time instead of running. I mean it. She caught his hand, pressing it against her face. I mean it. More than I've ever meant anything. Then we need to expose the truth. Araminta orchestrated this. She has to answer for it. How do you know it was Araminta? His smile was cold and sharp, because she made one mistake. She used the same forger who created false documents for her father 3 years ago. And that forger, when properly motivated, was very willing to provide testimony. Hope, fragile, terrifying hope, bloomed in Marin's chest. What do you need me to do? Come back to London. Face society. Help me destroy the woman who tried to destroy us. His gray eyes held hers. And when it's done, when the truth is known and Araminta's been dealt with, let me ask you again. Ask me what? But she already knew. And this time, when the moment came, she wouldn't run. London in autumn was a city of contradictions. Golden leaves against gray skies, bustling streets against the hush of drawing rooms where reputations were made and destroyed with whispered words. Marin returned to this world not as a governess, not as a jilted bride, but as something new, something dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. The Dowager received them in the same morning room where she'd first interrogated Marin a year ago. The porcelain figurines still watched with painted disapproval. The furniture was still designed to intimidate, but Marin was no longer intimidated. So, the Dowager's colorless eyes moved between her grandson and the woman who'd abandoned him at the altar. The prodigal returns. I assume there's an explanation for this reunion. There is. Corwin stepped forward. Marin didn't leave of her own volition. She was manipulated, fed lies designed to make her believe I'd been using her all along. Lies? The Dowager's expression didn't change. How convenient. Lies orchestrated by Lady Araminta Vance. Silence fell like a blade, For the first time in Marin's experience, the Dowager looked genuinely surprised. Araminta? That's a serious accusation. One I can prove. Corwin produced a sheaf of papers. Testimony from the forger who created the letter, supposedly from Marin's brother. Financial records showing payments from Araminta's accounts. Correspondence between Araminta and my household staff. Servants who were bribed to provide information about my private affairs. The Dowager took the papers, her sharp eyes scanning the evidence. Minutes passed. The clock on the mantel ticked with merciless precision. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "Comprehensive enough to destroy Araminta socially and legally, if we choose." If we choose. The Dowager looked up. And what does Miss Whitmore want? Revenge? Vindication? To reclaim the position she fled from? Marin stepped forward. "I want the truth known. I want Corwin's name cleared of any suggestion that he drove me away through cruelty or manipulation. And I want—" She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "I want a chance to prove that leaving was the worst mistake of my life." Pretty words. The Dowager set the papers aside. But words are easy. You abandoned my grandson in the most public, humiliating way possible. You vanished without explanation. You let him suffer for 6 months while you hid as a governess. I thought I was protecting myself from a lie. You thought what someone wanted you to think. That's not strength, Miss Whitmore. That's weakness. The word stung. But Marin didn't flinch. "You're right," she said quietly. "It was weakness. I was so afraid of being manipulated that I manipulated myself. I believed the worst because believing the worst felt safer than trusting someone with my heart. And now? Now I know that safety is just another word for loneliness." Her voice strengthened. "I love your grandson. Not his title, not his wealth, not what he can give me. Him. The man who reads poetry alone in libraries. The man who gives away pieces of his heart through book recommendations. The man who kept searching for me even after I gave him every reason to stop." Something flickered in the Dowager's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or memory. "My son said something similar once," she murmured. "About his wife. Your mother." She looked at Corwin. He said she was worth every raised eyebrow, every whispered criticism, and every door that closed because he'd married beneath him. "She was," Corwin said softly. "I know." The Dowager rose, moving to the window with that surprising grace. "I was wrong to oppose that match. I was wrong about many things." She turned. "But I wasn't wrong about wanting to protect this family, to ensure its continuation." "Marin can give you that," Corwin said. "She can give you heirs, continuity, everything you've demanded. But only if you accept her. Truly accept her." "And if I don't? Then I'll marry her anyway, and you'll spend your remaining years estranged from your only grandson and whatever children we might have." His voice was steady, final. "I won't lose her again, grandmother. Not for duty, not for expectations, not for anything." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then the Dowager laughed, a sound that held genuine warmth for the first time Marin could remember. "Spine," she said. "You both have it. Perhaps that's why I keep underestimating you." "Your Grace, I won't pretend I'm pleased about any of this. The scandal will be immense. The whispers will continue for years." The Dowager's eyes met Marin's. "But you were right about one thing, Miss Whitmore. My grandson needs someone who sees him, not his title. Someone willing to fight for him instead of simply accepting him. I'm willing to fight. Good. Because the battle ahead will make Araminta's scheming look like child's play." She picked up the papers again. We'll host a dinner. Next week, every major family in London will attend. Araminta will be invited, of course. She won't be able to resist the opportunity to gloat. And then? The Dowager smiled, a cold, sharp expression that reminded Marin forcefully that Honoria Ashcroft had survived 7 decades in society's treacherous waters. And then we destroy her. The dinner at Ravenscourt's London townhouse drew every notable family. They came for the scandal, of course, the opportunity to witness firsthand whatever drama would unfold when the jilted Duke confronted the woman who'd fled his altar. Invitations were accepted within hours. Cancellations of prior engagements swept through society like fever. Lady Araminta Vance arrived in a gown of deep crimson, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, her cat-green eyes glittering with barely concealed triumph. She believed she'd won. 6 months of watching Corwin suffer, 6 months of positioning herself as the sympathetic alternative, had convinced her that victory was inevitable. She didn't know about the forger's testimony. She didn't know about the financial records. She didn't know that the trap she'd set had been turned against her. The dinner proceeded with excruciating formality. Courses appeared and vanished. Conversation flowed carefully. Marin sat at Corwin's right hand, acutely aware of every glance, every whisper, every raised eyebrow. Let them stare. Let them watch. She was done running. The moment came between the fish course and the meat. Corwin rose, and the table fell silent. "I thank you all for attending this evening," he said, his voice carrying across the glittering assembly. "I know there's been speculation about recent events, about Miss Whitmore's return, about the circumstances of our postponed wedding." Postponed, not canceled. The word sent a ripple through the guests. "I've asked you here to address those rumors directly." Corwin's gray eyes swept the table. 6 months ago, the woman I love received information that led her to believe I had been manipulating her, that our entire relationship was a calculated scheme for my benefit. Araminta's smile flickered. That information was false, deliberately crafted, designed to destroy our relationship and drive Miss Whitmore away. Corwin's voice hardened. And I now have proof of who orchestrated this deception. The silence was absolute. The Dowager rose, producing the sheaf of papers. Testimony from the forger who created the fraudulent letter. Financial records tracing payments to bribed servants. Correspondence proving coordination and intent. She laid each document on the table with deliberate precision, all pointing to a single source. Every eye in the room turned to Araminta. Her face had gone white beneath her rouge. "This is absurd. You can't possibly—" "Can't I?" Corwin's voice was ice. "You've spent years pursuing a match I never wanted, Araminta. When I finally found someone I could love, you couldn't accept it. So you destroyed it the only way you knew how, with lies and manipulation and the careful exploitation of Marin's fears. You have no proof. I have a forger willing to testify in any court." The Dowager's smile was merciless. "I have servants prepared to confess their role. I have documents in your handwriting discussing the merchant's daughter problem." She paused. "Would you like me to read that correspondence aloud? I'm certain the guests would find it illuminating." Araminta looked around the table, searching for allies, finding none. Even her own mother had edged away, horror dawning on her face. "This isn't over," Araminta hissed. "Oh, but it is." Corwin's voice softened into something almost pitying. "You'll leave London by week's end. You'll retire to your family's country estate, and you will never, ever approach my family again. You can't. I can. I will. And if you test me, everything we have will become public record." He held her gaze until she looked away. "Do we understand each other?" Araminta stood, her chair scraping against the floor, with a sound like a scream. She gathered her skirts, her dignity, and her shattered pretenses. "You deserve each other," she spat. Then she was gone. The room erupted in whispers, in shocked exclamations, in the rapid redistribution of alliances that always followed a public fall from grace. But Corwin wasn't finished. He moved to Marin's side, taking her hand, and drawing her to her feet. The whispers faded. The room stilled. "6 months ago, I asked this woman to marry me." His voice filled the silence. She said yes. Circumstances prevented that wedding from occurring. But circumstances have changed. He dropped to one knee. The gasp that went through the assembly was audible. "Marin Whitmore." His gray eyes burned into hers with unwavering certainty. "I have searched for you across counties and cities. I have faced scandal and whispers and the doubt of everyone I know. I have never stopped believing that what we had was real, was true, was worth fighting for." Tears blurred her vision. "Corwin, I knelt before you once and asked you to be my wife. You said yes, and then the world tore us apart." His voice broke slightly. "I'm kneeling before you again, not because I expect the world to be kinder this time, but because I refuse to let fear win. I refuse to let manipulation and lies and other people's scheming determine my happiness." He pulled a ring from his pocket, the same ring he'd offered her months ago, the one she'd left behind on her dressing table when she fled. "Marry me, Marin. Not tomorrow, not next week, whenever you're ready. But say yes. Say yes and mean it this time. Say yes and stay." The room held its breath. Marin looked at the man kneeling before her, the Duke who'd given up propriety for truth, the wounded heart that had refused to stop hoping, the gray eyes that had seen her, truly seen her, from the very first moment. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms. The kiss that followed was everything, declaration and promise, ending and beginning, the sealing of a bond that had survived lies and separation and 6 months of darkness. Around them, the dinner guests erupted into applause. The Dowager watched with an expression that might have been approval. And somewhere in the London night, Araminta Vance's carriage carried her toward exile and obscurity. Her schemes finally unraveled, her cruelty finally answered. 1 year later, the Duchess of Ravenscourt stood at the window of her private sitting room, watching her husband cross the lawns below with their infant daughter in his arms. Corwin had taken to fatherhood with a devotion that surprised everyone except Marin. She'd seen the hunger in him for connection, for family, for the love he'd spent so many years denying himself. Little Helena had unlocked something in him that even Marin hadn't fully reached, a tenderness so profound it made her chest ache to witness. "You're staring again." Tanith appeared in the doorway, grinning. "It's rather nauseating, you know, the way you two look at each other. You'll understand someday. Perhaps. Though I rather think I'll be more dignified about it." Marin laughed. "You? Dignified? I'm extremely dignified. Ask anyone." "I've asked everyone." They all laughed. Tanith threw a cushion at her, and Marin caught it, still laughing. Below, Corwin looked up toward the window. Even at this distance, she could see his smile, the one he saved for her, warm and unguarded and full of everything they'd nearly lost. She smiled back. "He's asking for you." Tanith had moved to the window. "I can tell from that ridiculous expression." "Go on then. I'll have tea brought out to the garden." Marin descended through the house that had become her home, past the library where she'd first glimpsed Corwin's hidden depths, past the conservatory, where they'd almost kissed in the rain, past the morning room where the Dowager, who had grown genuinely fond of her granddaughter-in-law, held court with diminishing disapproval. She emerged into sunlight and the scent of roses. Corwin met her halfway, Helena babbling contentedly in his arms. She wanted her mother. She's 3 months old. She wants everything. She has excellent taste, like her father. He kissed her, softly, sweetly, while Helena gurgled between them. This was her life now. This impossible, beautiful life she'd never dared to dream of. A husband who loved her with fierce devotion. A daughter who had his gray eyes and her stubborn chin. A family that had expanded to include her own. Phineas finally settled into legitimate work, her parents comfortable in the lower house on the estate, her mother's garden now 3 times its original size. She'd walked away from the altar once, believing she was protecting herself. She'd been wrong. The real protection had come from walking back, from trusting, from choosing love over fear. And now, standing in the garden with her husband and daughter, surrounded by the life they'd built together, she understood what the Dowager had once said about Corwin's parents. Some loves were worth every whisper. Some risks were worth taking. Some fairy tales, against all odds, against all reason, came true for girls like her.